Hello and welcome back to the Cosmic Enigma. Here we share real-life experiences of encounters with the unknown, stories that come from beyond the stars, crafted to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love seeing just how far this mystery reaches. Now find a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and let yourself be carried away. Story 1. It wasn't the first time the hallway light flickered at odd intervals. Comings and goings were routine, a shuffle of footsteps that no one bothered to track. The mail piled neatly, except for the one envelope that always seemed to be missing. I didn't turn to see or ask who took it. It simply belonged somewhere else. The room felt a degree cooler than it should have been, and the curtains hung just a bit unevenly. I adjusted the blinds without thinking much of it. When I left, I made sure the blinds were uneven again. There was this sound, I keep coming back to it, this low mechanical hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls themselves. Not the refrigerator, not the heating system, something deeper. It would start without warning and stop just as suddenly, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. My teeth would ache when it happened, like the frequency was hitting some nerve I didn't know I had. The metallic taste would linger in my mouth for hours afterward. Sometimes I'd wake up and realize I'd been grinding my teeth all night, my jaw locked tight against something I couldn't name. I wasn't alone in that room. I know this with the same certainty I know my own heartbeat, but I can't tell you how I know. The air moved differently when something else was there, stirring currents that had nothing to do with ventilation or open windows. The temperature would shift in pockets, cold spots that drifted like invisible figures walking past. I'd feel the hairs on my arms stand up, that primitive warning system we all carry but rarely trust. Sometimes I'd catch myself holding my breath, listening for breathing that wasn't mine. The silence would stretch until my lungs burned, and I'd finally exhale, wondering why I'd been so afraid to make a sound. My thoughts felt borrowed. That's the only way I can describe it. I'd be thinking about something mundane, grocery lists or work deadlines, and suddenly there would be this intrusion. Not words exactly, but concepts that didn't belong to me. Images that flashed behind my eyelids when I blinked. A sense of urgency about things I couldn't identify. I'd find myself walking to windows I hadn't planned to approach, checking locks I'd already checked, turning on lights in rooms I wasn't even in. My hands would move before my brain caught up, reaching for objects I didn't remember wanting. The strangest part was how natural it felt in the moment, like I was finally doing what I was supposed to do. The lights came first, or maybe they came last. Memory scrambles the sequence, but the lights are always there, pulsing in patterns that made my vision swim. Not bright exactly, but insistent, like they were trying to communicate something my eyes weren't equipped to understand. The walls seemed to breathe with each flash, expanding and contracting in rhythm with something that wasn't quite music. There was a weight to the air, pressing down on my shoulders, making each breath feel deliberate. Objects in the room cast shadows that moved independently, stretching and shrinking without regard for the light sources. I remember reaching out to touch something, anything solid, but my hand passed through what should have been there, grasping only the thick, electric air. The ringing started after that, or maybe it had always been there and I'd just learned to hear it. A high-pitched whine that would spike randomly throughout the day, making me wince and press my palms against my ears. But covering my ears never helped because the sound wasn't coming from outside. It lived somewhere behind my forehead, a frequency that seemed to resonate with my skull. I'd catch myself tilting my head at odd angles, trying to find a position where the sound would fade. People would ask if I was okay, noticing the way I'd suddenly stop mid-conversation and cock my head like a dog hearing a whistle. I learned to smile and nod, to pretend I was just thinking about something else. Wait, the lights were different that time. steadier, more focused, like spotlights cutting through fog I couldn't see. The walls didn't breathe, they hummed with that same low frequency that made my teeth hurt. I was standing in a different spot too, closer to the window, my hand already on the latch before I realized I'd moved. The shadows fell in straight lines, geometric patterns that seemed too precise to be natural. When I reached out this time, my fingers met resistance, something solid but yielding, like touching the surface of water that refused to break. The electric sensation traveled up my arm, and for a moment I could taste copper and ozone, sharp and clean on my tongue. I keep finding myself checking the blinds now, not just in that room but everywhere. They're never quite right, always a degree off from where they should be. I'll adjust them carefully, making sure the slats are perfectly horizontal, evenly spaced, and within minutes I'll notice they've shifted again. Not dramatically, just enough to catch my peripheral vision, to make me question whether I'd really fix them at all. My fingers have developed a muscle memory for the motion, twisting the wand with practiced precision, but the satisfaction never lasts. The wrongness creeps back in, subtle and persistent, like a word on the tip of your tongue that refuses to form. The envelope is still missing. I've stopped looking for it, but I notice its absence every time I sort through the mail. There's a gap in the stack where it should be, a space that feels deliberately maintained. Sometimes I'll count the pieces, and the number is always one short of what it should be, though I can never remember what that missing piece contained. The other letters seem to shift to fill the space, but never quite succeed, leaving behind an outline of something that was important enough to take, but not important enough to explain. I don't try to understand anymore. Understanding requires a linear progression of cause and effect, and my memories refuse to arrange themselves that way. They exist in fragments, each one complete in itself but disconnected from the others, like photographs scattered on a table with no album to contain them. The important thing isn't what happened, but what's still happening. The way my skin prickles when I walk past certain doorways. The way I find myself listening for sounds that have no source. The way I've learned to live with the certainty that something fundamental has shifted, and there's no going back to the way things were before. Some changes don't announce themselves with fanfare. They slip in quietly, rearrange the furniture of your reality, and settle in to stay. Story 2. I had been watching the floorboards, eyes tracing the familiar lines where the wood met the wall. The shadows didn't shift, but something in the air felt charged, like a held breath. Outside, a gust of wind brushed against the windows, a soft murmur that might have been mistaken for an echo. Each tick of the ceiling fan seemed amplified, its rhythm oddly irregular. My gaze caught the edge of the bookshelf where the dust had settled uniformly, untouched. Yet something had changed, an inexplicable lightness in the room. That's when I noticed the single bookmark lying on the floor, and that it was never mine. To whoever finds this letter, if anyone ever does. I don't know why I'm writing this, maybe because I can't sleep anymore without feeling like someone's listening. Maybe because I need to get this out before I forget how to form words at all. You won't understand, but I have to try. I've been carrying this for so long that it's become part of me, like a second heartbeat I can't silence. I never told anyone about that afternoon. How could I? What would I even say? That something impossible happened in my living room while I was just sitting there, existing. That reality bent itself around a bookmark I'd never seen before. The bookmark was thin, cream-colored paper with frayed edges. Nothing special about it, really. Just lying there on the hardwood like it had always belonged. But I knew every inch of that room, every book, every corner, every speck of dust. I'd been living there for years, and that bookmark wasn't mine. When I picked it up, my fingers went numb, not cold numb, like touching something that existed in a different temperature than the rest of the world. The paper felt real enough, solid, but there was this vibration running through it, so faint I might have imagined it, might have. That's when the watching started. Not right away, it took days, maybe weeks. Time became elastic after that. I'd catch glimpses in my peripheral vision, nothing there when I turned my head. Shadows that lingered a beat too long. The feeling of being observed while I brushed my teeth, while I made coffee, while I stared at that same spot on the floor where the bookmark had been. I put it back there once, just to see, placed it exactly where I'd found it and waited. The air in the room grew thick, expectant. The silence pressed against my eardrums until I couldn't stand it anymore and snatched it up again. The relief was immediate, like surfacing from deep water. But the watching never stopped after that. You have to understand I was rational before this happened. I paid my bills on time, went to work, had normal conversations with normal people about normal things. I didn't believe in anything I couldn't explain. Now I can't explain anything, and I'm not sure I believe in myself anymore. The bookmark is still here with me as I write this. I carry it everywhere now because leaving it behind feels dangerous somehow, like abandoning a part of myself that might not find its way back. The paper has worn soft from handling, the edges even more frayed, but that strange vibration persists. Sometimes I think it's getting stronger. Sleep became impossible, not because I wasn't tired, God, I was so tired, but because closing my eyes meant surrendering to whatever was waiting in the dark behind my lids. I drift off for minutes at a time and wake to find my furniture rearranged, just slightly. A chair turned a few degrees. A lamp moved 6 inches to the left. Nothing dramatic enough to convince anyone else, but I knew. I started taking pictures of my apartment before bed, checking them against reality when I woke up. For a while this helped, proof that I wasn't losing my mind completely. But then the photographs started changing too. Not while I watched, I tried that. But I'd look away for a moment and look back to find details altered. A shadow in a different position, a book's spine facing the wrong direction, my own reflection in the background mirror showing an expression I didn't remember making. The mirror thing got worse. I'd catch sight of myself and feel this jolt of non-recognition, like seeing a stranger wearing my face. My eyes looked different somehow, older maybe, or younger, or just other. I stopped looking directly at mirrors after that, but peripheral glimpses were worse. Movement that didn't match my own, a tilt of the head when I was standing perfectly still. Work became unbearable. Coworkers would look at me strangely, like they were trying to place me. People I'd known for years would pause before saying my name, as if they had to remember it. I started eating lunch alone because conversations felt like walking through fog. Everyone seemed to be speaking from very far away, and my responses sounded foreign in my own ears. The bookmark never left my pocket. I'd touch it throughout the day, that little pulse of not quite electricity reminding me that something had definitely happened, that I wasn't completely insane. The alternative, that I was completely insane, felt worse somehow. Nights stretched endlessly. I'd lie in bed listening to the house settle, but the sounds were wrong. Footsteps in the attic when I lived in a single-story building, doors closing in rooms that didn't exist. The bookmark would grow warm against my chest where I kept it, and I'd know something was moving through my space, rearranging reality in ways too subtle to name. I tried throwing it away once, drove to a dumpster across town and hurled it in with such force that my shoulder ached for days. The relief lasted exactly 4 hours. Then I woke up and it was on my nightstand, perfectly clean, waiting. That's when I knew I wasn't dealing with something that followed normal rules. You might think I should have been terrified. I was at first, but terror is exhausting, and eventually it transforms into something else. Acceptance, maybe, or surrender. I stopped fighting the wrongness and started living around it, like adapting to a chronic illness. The watching intensified. I could feel eyes on me constantly now, even in crowded places, especially in crowded places, as if whatever was observing me could see through other people's faces. I'd be standing in line at the store and suddenly know with absolute certainty that the person behind me wasn't really looking at their phone, they were looking at me through their phone, through their own eyes, through something else entirely. My reflection disappeared gradually, not all at once, that would have been too obvious, too dramatic. First, I'd catch glimpses that seemed slightly out of sync. Then mirrors would show the space around me but somehow miss me entirely, like I was standing in a blind spot that followed me everywhere. Eventually, I stopped casting reflections at all. Nobody else seemed to notice, or maybe they did and just couldn't process it. The human brain is remarkably good at explaining away impossibilities. I tested this theory by standing directly in front of people while looking in mirrors. They'd glance at the reflection, then at me, then back at the reflection, and their faces would go briefly blank before they'd shake their heads and look away. I think I'm disappearing. Not physically, I can still touch things, still affect the world around me, but I'm becoming unstuck somehow, sliding sideways out of reality. The bookmark pulses stronger now, like a heartbeat, and sometimes I think it's the only thing keeping me tethered to anything at all. Food tastes like nothing. Colors seem muted, like someone adjusted the saturation on the entire world. Conversations happen around me rather than with me, even when people are responding to things I've said. I'm becoming peripheral to my own life. But the watching continues, intensifies, as if whatever claimed me is getting closer to completing some process I don't understand. I catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, constantly now shapes that might be people, might be shadows, might be something else entirely. They're always just out of direct sight, but their presence is undeniable. I tried leaving town once, packed a bag, got in my car, drove until the gas tank was nearly empty. But every road led back to my apartment, no matter which direction I chose. The GPS would show me heading away, the landscape outside would change, but somehow I'd always end up pulling into my own driveway with no memory of turning around. The bookmark was warm in my pocket the entire drive, pulsing like it was pleased. That's when I understood this wasn't something that had happened to me, it was something I'd become part of. The bookmark wasn't a clue or a trigger or a curse. It was a tether, connecting me to something vast and patient and utterly alien. Something that had been waiting in the spaces between normal moments for someone to notice it. And I had noticed, I had picked it up. I dream about the room now, even when I'm not sleeping. That moment when I first saw the bookmark lying on the floor, innocent and impossible. In the dreams, I can see myself from the outside, sitting in my chair, tracing the lines where the wood meets the wall. I watch myself notice the bookmark, watch myself reach for it, and I want to scream warnings that my dream self can't hear. But I always pick it up anyway. In every dream, in every memory, in every moment that loops and loops and loops, because that's what happened. That's what's always happening, somewhere in the spaces between seconds. I think I understand now why I found the bookmark, not because I was chosen, but because I was ready to slip sideways to become something other than what I was. The watching isn't malevolent, it's curious. Studying the process of transformation, documenting how a person becomes something else entirely. My handwriting looks different as I write this. The letters slant in ways that don't match my usual style, and sometimes I'll look down to find words I don't remember forming. But they're true words, honest words, even if they're coming from whatever I'm becoming rather than whatever I was. The bookmark is dissolving. Not physically, it's still here in my pocket, still real enough to touch, but it's becoming part of me, integrating into something deeper than flesh. Soon I won't need to carry it because I'll be it, or it'll be me, and the distinction won't matter anymore. I can feel the change accelerating. My reflection isn't the only thing that's disappearing. Photographs of me are fading too, becoming transparent, showing the background more clearly than my face. People forget my name mid-conversation now. My own mother called yesterday and asked who she was speaking to, even though she had dialed my number. But the watchers remember me. They're closer now, almost visible when I turn my head quickly enough. Tall shapes that might be human, might be shadows, might be something that was human once and chose to become something else. They're waiting for me to finish the transition, to join whatever they've become. I'm not afraid anymore. Fear belongs to the person I was before I picked up the bookmark, and that person is almost gone now. What's left is curious about what comes next, eager to understand what I glimpsed in that charged moment when reality shifted around a simple piece of paper. The room feels different now as I write. The shadows are moving again, but gently like water. The air tastes electric. The bookmark in my pocket has grown so warm it's almost hot, pulsing in rhythm with something that might be my heartbeat or might be something else entirely. I can see them clearly now, the watchers. They're beautiful in a way that has nothing to do with human aesthetics. Tall and fluid and patient, standing in the corners of my vision like they've always been there. Maybe they have, maybe I just wasn't ready to see them before. One of them is extending something toward me. Not a hand, they don't have hands in any sense I understand, but an invitation, a welcome, a recognition of what I've become. I'm going to stop writing soon, not because I'm finished, but because words are becoming inadequate. The language I need doesn't exist yet, or maybe it exists in spaces I'm only beginning to access. The bookmark is part of me now, completely integrated, and I can feel new senses awakening, new ways of perceiving that make sight and sound seem primitive. If someone finds this letter, if someone reads these words, know that I chose this. Not consciously at first, but the choice was always there. In that moment when I noticed something impossible and decided to reach for it instead of looking away. Everyone has moments like that. Most people choose to look away. I'm glad I didn't. The watchers are singing now, though singing isn't the right word. They're creating something with their voices that bypasses hearing entirely and resonates in places I didn't know I had. It's beautiful, it's welcoming, it's calling me home to a place I've never been but somehow remember. I can feel myself beginning to. Story 3. It wasn't the first time the window was open in the morning. The curtains barely shifted, hanging more out of habit than function. A stray leaf lay on the floor, despite the room being sealed tight the night before. I swept it into the bin without a second thought. The air felt a touch cooler, but the thermostat showed no change. I straightened the cushions on the couch, noting the slight indentation in one of them. The remote control was exactly where it should have been, untouched since yesterday. When I left the room, I made sure to close the door softly. I didn't mind if it stayed ajar. That's what I wrote down, that's what I remember writing down. But now, looking at these words, they feel like someone else's handwriting, like someone else's thoughts bleeding through the page. I've been trying to piece things together. The doctors say it's normal after what happened, but they won't tell me exactly what that was. They just nod and make notes on their clipboards, their pens scratching like insects against glass. The sound makes my teeth ache. There are fragments, pieces of something larger that I can't quite grasp. The hum, that's what comes back most often. Not a mechanical hum, not electrical, something deeper. It would start low, so low I'd feel it in my chest before I could hear it. Then it would climb note by note until it filled every corner of my skull. Sometimes I'd wake up with my hands pressed against my ears, but the sound was already inside. I remember the taste of copper, thick on my tongue, metallic and warm. I'd run to the bathroom and check my mouth in the mirror, expecting blood, but my reflection would stare back clean and pale. The taste would linger for hours. The indentation in the cushion, I keep coming back to that. It was too small for me, too deliberate, like someone had been sitting there waiting, watching. The fabric was still warm when I touched it, but that doesn't make sense. I live alone. I've always lived alone. Haven't I? Sometimes I catch myself setting 2 plates at the table, 2 cups of coffee cooling in the morning light. I'll stand there, staring at the extra cup, wondering why my hands moved without permission. The coffee is always black. I don't drink it black. The air would get thick sometimes, heavy like water. I'd move through my own house like I was drowning, each step requiring effort I didn't have. My lungs would work harder, pulling at something that wasn't quite oxygen. The walls seemed closer then, pressing inward with each breath. There was a door not in my house but somewhere else, somewhere I can't quite place. Light leaked from underneath it, but not normal light. This was different, hungry. It would pulse with that same rhythm as the hum, casting shadows that moved wrong. I remember standing in front of that door for what felt like hours, my hand hovering over the handle. Did I open it? I can't remember opening it. But I remember what came after. The figure was always in my peripheral vision, never there when I turned to look, but present enough to make the hair on my arms stand up, tall and perfectly still, like a photograph of a person rather than the person themselves. I'd catch glimpses in reflective surfaces, the bathroom mirror, the black screen of the television, puddles on the sidewalk, always watching, always waiting. My skin would crawl with the sensation of being touched. Fingers that weren't there tracing patterns on my arms, my neck, the back of my head. I'd spin around, swatting at empty air, but the feeling would persist. Sometimes I'd find marks afterward, not bruises, not scratches, just areas where my skin felt different, colder, like it belonged to someone else. The remote control was never where I left it. I'd place it on the coffee table before bed, aligned perfectly with the edge. In the morning, it would be rotated exactly 90 degrees, every single time. I started marking its position with a pen, tiny dots on the table. The marks were always there in the morning. The remote was always turned. I began to doubt my own memory. Maybe I was the one moving it. Maybe I was the one opening the window. Maybe I was the one humming in the middle of the night, that low, climbing sound that made my bones vibrate. But that doesn't explain the leaf. Leaves don't grow indoors. Leaves don't appear in sealed rooms. I kept that first one pressed between the pages of a book. When I went to look for it later, the page was blank, no leaf, no impression, just the faint smell of decay clinging to the paper. The thermostat never changed, but the temperature did. I'd shiver under blankets while the display read 72 degrees. Or I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the air so stifling I could barely breathe, but the numbers never moved. I started keeping my own thermometer, but it showed the same readings. My body was lying to me, or something else was lying to my body. There were voices sometimes, not words exactly. More like the shape of words, the impression of conversation happening just outside my hearing. I'd press my ear to the walls, following the sound from room to room, but it always stayed just ahead of me, just out of reach. The cushion indentation got deeper, more defined. I could see the outline of legs, of a torso, of arms resting on the sides. I started avoiding that chair, but the impression followed me. It would appear on my bed, on the kitchen chairs, even on the bathroom floor. always the same size, always the same shape. I tried staying awake. If I could catch whatever was happening, maybe I could understand it. But sleep would take me anyway, pulling me down into dreams that felt more real than waking. In those dreams, I was always walking toward that door, always reaching for the handle, always on the verge of opening it. And in those dreams, I wasn't alone. The figure was clearer there, still motionless, still wrong, but I could see its face, or what should have been its face. The features were familiar, like looking at a photograph of myself, but shifted, distorted, like someone had tried to recreate me from memory and gotten the proportions just slightly off. It would mouth words I couldn't hear. Its lips would move in patterns that felt important, urgent, but no sound would come. I'd try to move closer to understand, but the distance between us never changed. We were locked in that space, that moment, forever reaching toward each other, but never touching. I started finding things that weren't mine. A toothbrush with bristles too soft, clothes in my closet that didn't fit right, books with passages highlighted in handwriting that wasn't quite my own. When I tried to remove them, they'd reappear the next day, exactly where they'd been before. The copper taste got stronger. I could smell it now too, thick and metallic in the air. It would concentrate around certain objects, the extra coffee cup, the wrong toothbrush, the indented cushion. Like these things were bleeding something I couldn't see. My reflection started arriving late. I'd look in the mirror and see empty space for just a moment before my image caught up. When it did appear, it would be slightly out of sync, moving a fraction of a second behind my actual movements. Sometimes it would keep moving after I'd stopped, finishing gestures I hadn't made. The door in my dreams got closer each night. The light underneath it grew brighter, more insistent. I could feel heat radiating from the wood, smell something burning on the other side. My dream hand would reach for the handle, and each time I got a little closer to touching it. I woke up one morning with my palm burned, not badly, just a red mark in the shape of a door handle. It didn't hurt, but it was warm to the touch, like the metal had just been heated. I ran cold water over it, but the mark remained. It's still there now, fading but visible. The hum changed. Instead of climbing, it started to pulse. Rhythmic, like a heartbeat, but too slow, too deliberate. I could feel it in the floorboards, in the walls, in my teeth. It would sync with my own pulse for a moment, then drift away, pulling me with it. I found myself walking differently. My steps would match the rhythm of the hum without me realizing it. I'd catch myself moving through the house in time with that sound, like I was dancing to music only I could hear. But it didn't feel like my choice. It felt like something else was leading. The extra coffee cup was always empty in the morning, but the level in the pot was lower than it should have been. Someone was drinking it. Someone was there, sharing my space, my routine, my life, but I never saw them, never heard them. Only the evidence they left behind. I tried leaving notes, questions written on scraps of paper left where the cup always appeared. Who are you? What do you want? Why can't I see you? The papers would be gone in the morning, but no answers came. Just the same routine, the same invisible presence. The burn on my palm started to itch, not on the surface, but deeper. Like something was moving underneath the skin. I'd scratch until I drew blood, but the sensation never stopped. It felt like the mark was trying to open, to become an actual door in my flesh. In my dreams, I finally touched the handle. The metal was exactly as hot as I'd expected, searing my palm, but I held on. The door swung open and light poured out, not the hungry light I'd feared, but something else. Something that felt like recognition. On the other side was my house, my exact house, but reversed, everything in mirror image. And sitting on the couch in that perfectly indented cushion was the figure, still motionless, still wrong, but now I could see what it was wearing. My clothes, my exact clothes, down to the coffee stain on the shirt I'd gotten that morning. It raised its head, and I saw my own face looking back at me, but the eyes were different, older, sadder, like they'd seen something I hadn't. It mouthed those same words, and this time I could hear them. They were my voice, my words, but I wasn't speaking them. It wasn't the first time the window was open in the morning. I woke up writing. My hand was moving across the page without my permission, forming letters I didn't recognize. When I tried to stop, my fingers cramped, forcing me to continue. The words were familiar but wrong, like someone was telling my story from the outside. The hum has stopped. The extra coffee cup is gone. The indentation in the cushion has smoothed away, but I can feel something building, something getting ready to surface. I think I'm starting to remember what really happened, why there are gaps in my memory, why the doctors won't tell me the truth, why my reflection takes so long to catch up. I think the door is opening again. And this time I might be on the other side. Story 4. The initial inventory inspection commenced at 1800 hours. Rows of identical boxes lined the shelves, each barcode meticulously recorded. Scanning devices showed all items present and accounted for according to the digital ledger. Temperature controls remained constant, unwavering between documented check-ins. Dust gathered in corners, undisturbed by recent movements. An unopened delivery sat inconspicuously by the entrance, logged but lacking a corresponding dispatch record. All lights functioned properly, though the power indicator flickered irregularly. Exit routes were unobstructed, yet the motion sensors failed to register any activity. The air vent emitted a low hum, yet the security footage looped back 2 minutes. I found this report in my handwriting, but I don't remember writing it. The paper feels familiar between my fingers. The ink matches the pen I always carry, but the words themselves seem foreign, like reading something I wrote in my sleep. There's a gap in my memory, not the usual kind where you forget where you put your keys or what you had for lunch. This is different, deliberate, surgical. I know something happened because I can feel the absence of it, the way you feel the space where a tooth used to be. I've been living with this hollow sensation for weeks now. My reflection looks the same, my routine continues unchanged, but there's this persistent feeling that I'm missing something essential. Something that would explain why I wake up with the taste of copper in my mouth, or why certain frequencies on the radio make my skin crawl. The warehouse report was tucked inside a book I'd been reading. I must have used it as a bookmark, though I have no memory of working any inventory job. The handwriting is definitely mine, but the style is too clinical, too precise. I don't write like that. I don't think I write like that. I decided to investigate. Maybe if I could find this warehouse, something would come back to me. The report mentions a delivery with no dispatch record, security footage that loops. These details feel significant, though I can't explain why. In my desk drawer, underneath old receipts and forgotten business cards, I found a small digital recorder, the kind investigators use in movies. I'd never seen it before, but it was sitting there like it belonged. When I pressed play, my own voice filled the room. Third attempt at documentation. Previous recordings corrupted or incomplete. Audio quality deteriorating with each session. Background interference increasing. Note, the humming sound is getting louder. My voice on the recording sounds different, strained. There's something in the background, a low electronic drone that makes my teeth ache. The recording continues. The boxes aren't what they appear to be. Scanning them reveals standard consumer electronics, but the weight is all wrong, too light, like they're hollow, or filled with something that doesn't register on the scale properly. I stopped the recording. My hands were shaking. I don't remember making this audio file, but I can hear the fear in my voice. Fear of what? The next entry was even more disturbing. The delivery by the entrance moved. I'm certain it was positioned differently during my second walkthrough. Security cameras show nothing. Loop still active. 2 minutes, 17 seconds now, getting longer. As I listened, fragments began surfacing. Not complete memories, but impressions. The smell of new plastic mixed with something metallic and cold. The sensation of being watched from multiple angles simultaneously. Lights that flickered in patterns too regular to be random. I found myself drawn to electronics stores, hardware shops, anywhere with that particular combination of scents. Each visit triggered more pieces. Standing in the fluorescent-lit aisles, I could almost remember the weight of a scanner in my hand, the beeping of barcodes being processed. But these weren't pleasant memories. There was something wrong with that warehouse, something that made my recorded voice sound like it was fighting panic. The fourth audio entry was mostly static, but I could make out fragments of my own whispered observations. Motion sensors offline, but something is definitely moving. Can't see it directly. Peripheral vision only. Shadows behaving incorrectly. The unopened delivery is breathing. Breathing? How does a delivery breathe? I played the recording again, turning up the volume. Underneath my whispered words, there was indeed something that sounded like slow, deliberate breathing. Not human breathing, too rhythmic, too deep. That night I started having the dreams, or maybe they weren't dreams, maybe they were memories trying to surface. I'm walking down endless rows of shelves. Each box I pass makes a soft sound like something shifting inside. The scanner in my hand keeps beeping, but the display shows symbols instead of numbers. Symbols that hurt to look at directly. The breathing sound is everywhere now, coming from the walls, the ceiling, the boxes themselves. I turn toward the entrance where the delivery sits, and for just a moment I can see it expanding and contracting like a massive lung. I wake up with the taste of copper stronger than ever. During the day, normal life continues, but there are signs that something is still wrong. My reflection in store windows sometimes moves a fraction of a second after I do. Electronics near me occasionally emit that same low-frequency hum from the recording. Strangers on the street sometimes stop and stare, like they're seeing something behind me that I can't perceive. I found another recording, this one labeled Final Documentation. The loop is breaking down. Security footage now shows 17 minutes of repeated activity. I can see myself in the recording, but I'm doing things I don't remember doing. In the footage, I'm talking to something off camera. My mouth is moving, but there's no audio. My expression suggests I'm receiving instructions. My recorded voice becomes more agitated. The delivery has been opened, contents unknown. Box appears empty but casts a shadow that doesn't match its dimensions. The shadow is moving independently. I need to leave, but the exit routes keep changing. The warehouse is larger inside than it should be. The recording cuts to static, then my voice returns, barely audible. They're not boxes, they're windows, and something on the other side is looking through. I stopped the playback. My apartment suddenly felt too small, too exposed. Every shadow seemed to be moving slightly. Every reflection appeared delayed. I tried to research warehouses in the area that might match the description, but every search led to dead ends. No inventory positions in my employment history, no record of the digital recorder purchase, no explanation for how I acquired knowledge of security systems and barcode scanning procedures. But the memories keep coming back in pieces. Standing in that warehouse, I remember now that the air itself felt wrong, too thick, like breathing through fabric. The fluorescent lights above weren't just flickering randomly, they were responding to something, communicating. The boxes on the shelves weren't inventory, they were containers for something that existed in the spaces between normal perception. When I scanned their barcodes, the numbers that appeared weren't product codes, they were coordinates. I remember the moment I realized the delivery by the entrance wasn't waiting to be processed, it was waiting for me. The breathing sound wasn't coming from inside the box, it was coming from whatever was using the box as a doorway. In my final recovered memory, I'm standing directly in front of that delivery. The cardboard exterior has become translucent, and I can see through to something that defies description. Not darkness, but an absence of light so complete it seems to have texture. Something reaches out from that absence. Not a hand, not a tentacle, but something that bypasses vision entirely and touches the part of my mind responsible for memory. I feel it sorting through my experiences, selecting what to keep and what to remove. The last thing I remember clearly is understanding that I was being prepared for something. The memory removal wasn't punishment or protection, it was preparation. Now, sitting in my apartment with these recovered fragments, I realize the process isn't complete. The gaps in my memory aren't healing, they're expanding. Each day, I remember less about my life before the warehouse, but I remember more about what happened inside it. The delivery never left, it followed me home. I can feel it now, positioned just outside my peripheral vision. When I turn to look directly, there's nothing there, but the breathing sound has returned, soft and patient. The shadows in my apartment have started moving independently, and my reflection has begun doing things I'm not doing. I think I understand now why the security footage looped. It wasn't a malfunction. It was showing me what would happen over and over until I was ready to accept it. The warehouse wasn't a workplace, it was an interview. And I got the job. The breathing is getting louder. My reflection is smiling even though I'm not. The shadows are arranging themselves into patterns that hurt to perceive directly. I should be afraid, but I'm not. The fear was removed along with everything else they didn't need. What remains is purpose, clarity, understanding. I'm writing this final account because documentation is important. Someone else will find it, just like I found the warehouse report. They'll feel that same hollow sensation, that same sense of missing something essential. The delivery by their door will be breathing. And they'll understand that some jobs never really end. They just find new employees. Story 5. I brushed the thin layer of dust from the tabletop and felt a chill run through my fingers. Each particle seemed to clamor for attention, betraying a presence that shouldn't have been. The creak of the wooden floor beneath me was only a shadow in my peripheral awareness. My skin rose with goosebumps as if the room exhaled a secret. The air tasted older, more muted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the dust carried stories I wasn't meant to hear. That's where it starts, I think, where my memory begins to fragment and scatter like those dust particles. I've been trying to piece together what happened, but the harder I concentrate, the more everything slips away. like trying to hold water in cupped hands. There was a humming sound, I remember that clearly now. Not the kind you hear with your ears, but the kind that vibrates through your chest cavity, makes your teeth ache. It would come and go, sometimes so faint I thought it was just the blood rushing through my head. Other times it was so loud I had to press my palms against my temples just to think. The room had wallpaper, faded flowers, maybe roses, but the pattern seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. I spent hours staring at those walls, tracing the designs with my eyes, trying to make sense of the repetition. Sometimes the flowers looked like faces, sometimes like open mouths. I was wearing a blue shirt, cotton. The fabric felt rough against my skin, like it had been washed too many times or maybe not enough. My hands were dirty, fingernails caked with something dark. Soil, I told myself, just soil from gardening, but I couldn't remember any garden. The footsteps started on the second day, or was it the third? Time moved strangely in that place. Heavy, deliberate steps above my head, pacing back and forth across what must have been another room. But when I looked up, all I saw was ceiling, cracked plaster and water stains that looked like continents on an alien map. I found a photograph tucked behind a loose board near the window. Black and white, edges yellowed and curling. A group of people standing in front of a building I didn't recognize. Their faces were blurred as if they'd moved just as the shutter clicked, but their eyes seemed to follow me around the room. I kept the photo in my pocket, checking it obsessively, but each time I looked, there seemed to be fewer people in the frame. The smell came in waves, metallic and sweet, like copper pennies mixed with overripe fruit. It would hit me suddenly, make my stomach clench and my mouth water in that sick way that comes before vomiting. I searched everywhere for the source, pulling up floorboards, checking behind furniture, but I never found anything. The smell just was like it had always been there, woven into the very structure of the place. There was a door I couldn't open, painted green, though the color had faded to something between sage and decay. The handle turned easily enough, but the door itself wouldn't budge, not locked, just stuck, or maybe something was holding it closed from the other side. I could see light underneath it sometimes, a thin golden line that pulsed like a heartbeat. I spent hours sitting in front of that door, my ear pressed to the wood, listening for sounds from within. My reflection looked wrong in the mirror above the sink. Not dramatically different, nothing I could point to specifically, but wrong nonetheless. The proportions seemed off, like someone had adjusted a photograph just slightly, enough to create unease without obvious distortion. I avoided looking at it after a while, keeping my eyes down when I washed my hands or brushed my teeth. The water from the faucet tasted of rust and something else I couldn't identify, something organic and unpleasant. I drank it anyway because there was nothing else, but it left a coating on my tongue that persisted for hours. My lips became chapped and began to peel, revealing raw pink skin underneath that stung when I touched it. I wrote things down, trying to keep track of what was happening, but my handwriting looked foreign to me. The letters slanted at odd angles, some so faint they were barely visible, others pressed so hard into the paper they tore through to the pages beneath. When I reread what I'd written, the words seemed to rearrange themselves, forming sentences I didn't remember writing. The humming grew stronger during what I assumed were night hours. The room had no windows to the outside, just that one facing the hallway, so I couldn't tell if there was sun or moon beyond those walls. But there were periods when everything felt heavier, more oppressive, and the humming would intensify until it felt like my skull might crack open from the pressure. I discovered I could make the sound stop by holding my breath. Not just breathing quietly, but holding it completely until my lungs burned and spots danced in my vision. In those moments of absolute stillness, the humming would fade and I could hear other things, whispers that might have been wind through cracks in the walls, scratching that could have been mice in the walls or fingernails against wood. The floorboards were uneven, creating valleys and peaks that caught shadows in strange ways. I mapped the irregular surface with my bare feet, memorizing each dip and rise until I could navigate the room in complete darkness. Some boards were loose, creaking ominously under my weight, while others felt solid as stone. The pattern seemed random, but I began to suspect there was logic to it, some code I was meant to decipher. Food appeared sporadically on a tray by the door. Simple things, bread that tasted of nothing, water in a plastic cup, sometimes an apple that was either too green or too soft. I never saw who brought it, never heard footsteps in the hallway beyond. The tray would simply be there when I checked, as if it had materialized from nothing. I ate mechanically, tasting little, my body requiring fuel, even as my mind rejected the reality of the situation. The photograph kept changing. I'm certain of this, though I know how it sounds. The blurred faces would shift positions, sometimes appearing clearer, sometimes disappearing entirely. New figures would emerge from the background shadows while others faded away. The building behind them grew more detailed with each viewing, revealing windows and doors and architectural features that definitely hadn't been there before. I began to suspect the walls were breathing, subtle movements, barely perceptible but consistent. The wallpaper would expand and contract in a rhythm that almost matched my own heartbeat. When I pressed my palm against the surface, I could feel warmth underneath and sometimes what felt like a pulse. The roses in the pattern seemed to bloom and wilt in slow motion, their petals darkening and falling away only to regenerate moments later. My dreams, when they came, were filled with corridors that stretched infinitely in all directions. I would walk for what felt like hours, my footsteps echoing off unseen walls, searching for something I couldn't name. The air in these dream hallways was thick and humid, making each breath an effort. Sometimes I would glimpse movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look, there was nothing but empty space and shadows. The green door began to leak, not water, but something darker, more viscous. The substance would seep from the gap between door and frame, pooling on the floor in shapes that reminded me of letters from an alphabet I didn't recognize. I tried to clean it up, but it would reappear within hours, sometimes in the same patterns, sometimes in new configurations that seemed to be trying to tell me something. I found myself talking to the walls, carrying on conversations with the shifting patterns in the wallpaper. The roses became confidants, the water stains on the ceiling transformed into a council of advisors offering cryptic guidance. My voice sounded strange in the enclosed space, echoing back with slight distortions that made me question whether the words I was hearing were the same ones I had spoken. The humming started to sound like voices, not clear enough to make out words, but with the cadence and rhythm of speech. Multiple voices overlapping, sometimes harmonizing, sometimes arguing. I would strain to understand what they were saying, pressing my ear to different surfaces, trying to find the spot where the sound was clearest. But the moment I thought I was close to comprehension, the voices would fade back into that monotonous hum. My reflection disappeared from the mirror entirely for 3 days. The glass showed only the room behind me, as if I had become transparent. I waved my arms, jumped up and down, made faces, but nothing appeared in the silvered surface. On the 4th day, my reflection returned, but it moved a fraction of a second behind my actual movements, creating a disorienting lag that made me dizzy and nauseous. The photograph crumbled to dust in my hands without warning. One moment I was studying the faces, trying to determine if I recognized any of them, and the next moment there was nothing but gray powder sifting through my fingers. But I could still see the image clearly in my mind, more clearly than when I had actually been holding it. The faces were no longer blurred, and I realized with growing horror that one of them was mine. I remember now that there was music, faint melodies drifting through the walls, playing instruments I couldn't identify. The songs had no discernible structure, no beginning or end, just continuous streams of notes that seemed to loop back on themselves. Sometimes the music would synchronize with the humming, creating harmonies that were beautiful and terrible at the same time. The green door finally opened, not because I forced it, but because it chose to open, swinging inward on hinges that made no sound. Beyond was not another room, but a space that defied description. It wasn't dark, but it wasn't light either. It wasn't empty, but I couldn't see what filled it. I stood at the threshold for an eternity, afraid to step forward, afraid to step back, paralyzed by the impossibility of what lay before me. Something touched my shoulder from behind, fingers that felt too long, too cold, pressing gently but insistently. I didn't turn around. I couldn't turn around. The touch lingered for a moment that stretched like taffy, then withdrew, leaving an impression on my skin that burned like frostbite. When I finally found the courage to look behind me, the room was empty, but the wallpaper roses had all turned to face the spot where I stood. The dust is settling again now. I can feel it accumulating on my skin, in my hair, between my fingers. Each particle carries weight beyond its physical presence, bearing messages I'm only beginning to understand. The room exhales its secrets more freely now, and I realize I was never meant to leave. I was meant to become part of the pattern, another story carried in the dust. The humming has stopped, but something else has taken its place. A sound like breathing, deep and rhythmic, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. My reflection has returned to the mirror, but it's not alone anymore. There are other faces visible behind mine, the same faces from the photograph, watching with eyes that hold knowledge I'm not ready to possess. I think I understand now why I can't remember how I got here. Memory is a luxury for those who exist in linear time, who move forward from moment to moment without doubling back on themselves. But this place exists outside such constraints, and I have become part of its eternal present, where all moments happen simultaneously and nothing ever truly ends. The green door stands open still, but I no longer see emptiness beyond its threshold. I see myself sitting at this same table, brushing dust from its surface, feeling that same chill run through my fingers. The cycle completes itself endlessly, and I am both observer and participant in this repetition. Something is waking up inside these walls, something that has been sleeping in the dust and the shadows, in the spaces between the wallpaper roses and the cracks in the plaster. My presence has disturbed its rest, and now it stirs with increasing urgency. I can feel its attention turning toward me like a searchlight, and I know that soon it will be fully awake. Story 6. There was a time when I dismissed it as mere coincidence, something that existed in the periphery of my daily routine. Every morning while sipping my coffee, I'd notice a pair of shoes left outside the neighboring door, the same pair, side by side, always facing the same direction. Yet one day the left shoe was inexplicably turned at an angle. I shrugged it off at first, until it happened again, the same shoe, now slightly scuffed. Yesterday I noticed a new pair, but only one shoe was there. The other had vanished, leaving behind a hint of unease I can't quite shake. To whoever finds this letter, if anyone ever does, I need you to understand that I'm not writing this because I expect answers. I'm writing because the silence has become too heavy, and carrying this alone feels like drowning in shallow water. You know that feeling when you're standing chest deep in a lake and suddenly your feet can't find the bottom anymore? That's what living with this has become. I've never told anyone about the shoes, not really. How do you explain that something so mundane, so perfectly ordinary, became the thread that unraveled everything I thought I knew about the world around me? My therapist would have called it projection, my mother would have blamed stress, my friends would have laughed it off over drinks, so I kept quiet, I kept watching. But the watching changed me. There's this sound now, I hear it mostly in the early hours, right before dawn when the world holds its breath. It's like fabric tearing, but softer, like whispers through wet paper. Sometimes I think it's coming from the hallway outside my apartment, sometimes from inside my own chest. I've learned not to check anymore because checking never reveals anything, and the absence of explanation is worse than the sound itself. The neighbor, I never knew their name, never saw their face clearly, just glimpses. A shadow moving behind frosted glass, the soft click of a lock turning, the whisper of socks against hardwood. But after the second shoe disappeared, the glimpses stopped too. The apartment went quiet, not empty quiet, waiting quiet. I remember the night I first noticed my reflection had changed. Not dramatically, nothing you'd catch unless you were really looking, unless you'd been staring at yourself for hours trying to figure out if the person in the mirror was still you. My left eye just slightly more open than the right now. The way my mouth doesn't quite close all the way anymore, like I'm perpetually about to speak but can't find the words. Sleep became something that happened to other people. I'd lie in bed listening to that tearing sound, watching shadows move across my ceiling in patterns that didn't match the streetlight outside. The shadows moved like they were looking for something, like they were reading the walls, learning the shape of my space, memorizing the rhythm of my breathing. During the day, things felt almost normal, except for the way people started looking through me instead of at me. The barista at the coffee shop where I'd been going for 3 years suddenly needed to see my credit card to confirm my name. My coworker asked me to introduce myself in a meeting where we'd sat next to each other for months. Small things, forgettable things, if they hadn't kept happening. The shoes multiplied after that, not just outside my neighbor's door, everywhere. Abandoned on park benches, tucked under bus stop seats, lined up along the edges of parking lots, always singles, always left shoes. I started taking pictures, but they never showed up clearly in the images, blurred, distorted, like the camera couldn't quite focus on something that shouldn't be there. I found myself walking different routes to avoid them, but the detours just led me to more. It was like the city was rearranging itself around my movements, presenting me with evidence of something I couldn't name. Evidence that I was part of something larger and more deliberate than coincidence. The worst part wasn't the shoes or the shadows or even the way people forgot me. The worst part was the certainty that grew in my chest like a tumor, the knowledge that I was being prepared for something. That all of this was leading somewhere, and I wouldn't have a choice about where. I started leaving my own shoes outside my door. I don't know why. It felt like participation, like acknowledgement. Like maybe if I played along, the rules would become clearer. But participation just made everything more intense. The tearing sound got louder. The shadows moved faster. My reflection started looking more like a stranger wearing my face. There were moments, brief, flickering moments, when I could feel the presence of something vast and patient hovering just outside my perception. Not watching me exactly. More like I was a note in a song it was composing, and it was waiting for the right moment to let me ring out. I tried to research it, of course. Spent hours online reading about shared hallucinations, mass hysteria, environmental factors that could cause perceptual distortions. But research requires the ability to define what you're looking for, and I couldn't even describe what was happening to me without sounding like I was describing a dream. Maybe I was, maybe I still am. The night I decided to write this letter, I found a single right shoe outside my door. Brown leather, scuffed at the toe, exactly the right size. It fit perfectly when I tried it on, like it had been made for my foot specifically, like it had been waiting for me to find it. I'm wearing it now as I write this. The left foot is bare, and the floor feels different against my skin, rougher, more real, like the shoe is filtering something I wasn't meant to feel directly. I can hear movement in the apartment next door for the first time in weeks. Soft footsteps, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of fabric against walls, but the footsteps don't match any normal pattern of walking. They're too rhythmic, too deliberate, like someone practicing a dance they've never learned. My reflection has stopped changing because I've stopped looking. The mirrors in my apartment are covered now with sheets and towels, but I can still feel them watching me from underneath the fabric, watching and waiting for me to look back. The tearing sound has become constant now, a background hum that I only notice when it occasionally stops. In those moments of silence, the world feels brittle, like everything might shatter if I moved too quickly or breathed too hard. I think I understand now why I was chosen, why the shoes appeared, why the shadows learned the shape of my space. I think I'm supposed to complete something, to balance something that got thrown off kilter. The right shoe feels heavier with each passing hour, like it's filling up with purpose. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to leave this letter on my kitchen table and walk outside. I'm going to follow the trail of left shoes that I know will be waiting for me, leading away from this building, away from this life that no longer quite fits. I don't know where they'll lead, but I know I won't be coming back. If you find this letter, if you're reading these words, then you might be next. Pay attention to the small things that repeat. Pay attention to the way shadows move when they think you're not watching. Pay attention to your reflection, especially around the eyes. And if you start finding shoes, single shoes, always the opposite of what you need, don't ignore them. Don't try to explain them away. They're not random. They're not coincidence. They're an invitation you can't refuse. The footsteps next door have stopped. My bare foot is getting cold. The tearing sound is getting louder, more insistent, like something is trying to break through. I think it's almost time. I think I'm ready to let go. Story 7. It was the scent of overripe oranges that greeted me, clinging to the air in the hallway. Sweet, almost intoxicating, yet distinctly out of place in a house that hadn't seen fresh fruit in weeks. I hesitated at the threshold, the unexpected aroma unraveling a string of memories I had long secured away. The walls seemed to lean in as if drawn by my confusion, and for a moment the hallway appeared narrower, tighter. I moved forward, drawn by a compulsion to find the source. The air grew dense with the scent, each step thickening the atmosphere. I remembered that smell from another house, another time, when the past felt like it could be rewritten. I shouldn't have followed it, but I did. The humming started in my teeth first, a low, persistent vibration that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep in my jaw, spreading up through my skull like electricity finding its path. I can't place when exactly I first noticed it. Was it before the oranges, after? The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was too intimate for that, too personal. It felt like my bones were tuning forks struck by an invisible hand. Sometimes I press my palms against my ears, trying to muffle it, but the humming only grows stronger. It's not unpleasant, exactly, just wrong. Like hearing your own heartbeat amplified through speakers you didn't know were there. There's a weight in the corner of my vision that shouldn't exist. Not a shadow, not a person, but something that occupies space without filling it. I turn my head and it's gone, but the impression lingers like a thumbprint on glass. My peripheral vision has become unreliable, constantly suggesting movement where none should be. I've started keeping still for long periods, letting my eyes adjust, waiting to catch whatever it is in the act of being there. But stillness only makes it worse. The presence grows bolder when I'm not looking directly, pressing closer to the edges of my awareness. Sometimes I think I can feel it breathing, though that makes no sense. Breathing requires lungs, and this thing feels like empty space learning how to want something. My thoughts have developed gaps. Mid-sentence, I'll discover I'm thinking about something entirely different with no memory of the transition. It's like someone is changing channels in my head while I'm not paying attention. I'll be considering what to have for lunch, and suddenly I'm deep in a memory of rain on a windshield, though I can't remember the last time I drove anywhere. The worst part is the certainty that these aren't my memories at all. They taste different in my mind, flavored with experiences I never had. Someone else's childhood bedroom, someone else's fear of basement stairs, someone else's recurring dream about drowning in shallow water. The light came from everywhere and nowhere, pulsing in rhythm with something I couldn't identify. Not my heartbeat, something slower, more deliberate. I remember reaching toward it, or maybe away from it. The distinction seems important, but I can't grasp why. My hand looked strange in that light, translucent, like I was seeing through my own skin to something moving underneath. The air tasted metallic, sharp on my tongue like I'd been sucking on pennies. There was a sound too, high-pitched and constant, like a tea kettle that never quite reaches its whistle. Or maybe that was just the ringing in my ears. The light pulsed faster, and I felt something shift inside my chest, a rearrangement of parts I didn't know were movable. I can't sleep through the night anymore, not because of insomnia, but because of the waking. 3, maybe 4 times I surface from dreams I can't remember into a darkness that feels occupied. My sheets are always damp with sweat that smells faintly of ozone, that clean electric scent that comes before lightning strikes. Sometimes there are marks on my arms, small and perfectly round, like someone pressed coins against my skin while I slept. They don't hurt, but they don't fade either. I've started wearing long sleeves, though I can't explain why to anyone who asks. The marks feel warm to the touch, warmer than the rest of my skin, and sometimes I catch myself tracing them absent-mindedly, like worry stones worn smooth by anxious fingers. But that's not how it happened, is it? The light wasn't pulsing. It was steady, unwavering, like staring into the sun through closed eyelids. I wasn't reaching toward anything. I was frozen, completely unable to move, watching as the light grew brighter and more intense. The metallic taste was stronger this time, coating my throat until I could barely swallow, and the sound wasn't high-pitched at all. It was deep, so deep I felt it in my bones, a bass note played on an instrument I'd never heard before. My hand didn't look translucent. It looked solid, more solid than it had ever been, like I was becoming more real rather than less. The shifting in my chest wasn't a rearrangement. It was an addition, something new taking up residence where nothing had been before. I don't try to make sense of it anymore. The fragments don't want to be assembled into a coherent whole. They resist organization, slipping away whenever I try to arrange them in any logical sequence. Some days I wake up and the memories feel like they belong to someone else entirely. Other days they press against the inside of my skull with such intensity that I have to sit down and breathe slowly until they settle back into their scattered positions. I've learned to live with the inconsistencies, the way each recollection contradicts the others. The truth, if there ever was one, has become less important than the feeling that something fundamental has changed. I'm not the same person who first smelled those oranges in the hallway. I'm someone else wearing my life like an ill-fitting coat, and sometimes in the quiet moments between sleeping and waking, I remember just enough to know that forgetting might be the only kindness I have left. Story 8. I mentioned I'd only stayed on the ground floor, that the rain had kept me near the entrance, away from anything more. They seemed satisfied, jotting notes in rhythm with the drizzle outside. Yet the damp scent of old wood lingered on my fingertips, stubborn and telling. The stairs had creaked a note that still echoed in my mind, carrying the weight of untold steps. A slight draft brushed my cheek with the chill of an unwelcome memory. The hallway light flickered, casting shadows that knew my path. I didn't mention the door half ajar or the coat beside it, but the mud was drying on my shoes. The buzzing started 3 days later, not the kind you hear with your ears, but the kind that lives inside your skull, humming against bone. I wake up and my sheets are damp, though the windows are closed. The taste of copper sits heavy on my tongue, metallic and sharp, like I've been holding pennies in my mouth while sleeping. My fingertips still smell of that wood, even after washing them raw. There were lights behind the trees. The memory comes in pieces, fragments that don't fit together cleanly. I remember standing in a doorway that wasn't quite right, the frame tilting at an angle that made my vision swim. The coat hanging there was too large, shoulders broad enough to hold something that wasn't quite human. Water dripped from its hem in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat, each drop catching light that had no source. The buzzing grows stronger when I try to remember more. It fills the spaces between thoughts, drowning out the details that want to surface. My skin prickles with electricity, hair standing on end in the stillness of my room. The air tastes of ozone, sharp and clean, like the moment before lightning strikes. I don't remember ever coming back. The stairs creak again in my dreams, the same note, the same weight. But now I can see my feet moving up them, step by careful step, though I told them I never left the ground floor. The wood is dark with age and moisture, grains swirling in patterns that seem to move when I'm not looking directly at them. My hand trails along a banister that feels warm to the touch, warmer than wood should be. The hallway stretches longer than it should, doors lining both sides like watching eyes. Some are closed tight, paint peeling in deliberate patterns. Others stand open just enough to reveal darkness beyond, darkness that breathes with its own rhythm. The light above flickers in Morse code, spelling out words I can't quite catch, messages that slip away the moment I think I understand them. That coat moves without wind. My reflection in the bathroom mirror shows mud on my shoes that I cleaned off days ago. The stains are darker now, more deliberate, forming shapes that remind me of footprints going up instead of down. When I blink, the mud shifts, rearranging itself into new patterns, new directions. The mirror fogs with breath that isn't mine. The door was more than half ajar. It was waiting. Time moves strangely in that hallway, seconds stretching like taffy, minutes collapsing into themselves. I can feel my pulse in my throat, rapid and uneven, keeping time with the dripping from the coat. The draft that touches my face carries scents of elsewhere, places that don't exist on any map I know. Rain that falls upward, earth that glows with its own light. The noise didn't come from outside. I reach for the door handle, though I never meant to climb the stairs. My fingers close around metal that's too warm, too smooth, shaped like a handle but feeling like something organic, something that pulses with life. The door swings open without resistance, revealing a room that can't possibly fit in the building I entered. The buzzing stops, complete silence wraps around me like water, thick and suffocating. My ears ring with the absence of sound, pressure building behind my eyes until I think they might burst. The room beyond the door stretches impossibly wide, ceiling lost in shadows that move with purpose. The air shimmers with heat that has no source, creating mirages of furniture that isn't there. There were lights behind the trees, but the trees were inside. The coat falls from its hook without wind to move it, crumpling to the floor with the weight of something still wearing it. I can see the shape of shoulders, arms, a head that turns to look at me though there's nothing there to see with. The fabric is darker than black, absorbing light instead of reflecting it, creating a void in the shape of a person. My feet move without my permission, carrying me deeper into the room that shouldn't exist. The floor beneath me feels solid but gives slightly with each step, like walking on skin. The walls breathe, expanding and contracting in rhythm with my heartbeat, or maybe my heartbeat has synchronized with theirs. I don't remember what I found there. The memory fractures, splitting into sensory fragments that refuse to connect. The taste of ozone grows stronger, making my tongue numb. My fingertips tingle with electricity that jumps between them, creating tiny arcs of light in the darkness. The scent of rain mixes with something else, something organic and wrong, like flowers blooming in reverse. Light comes from everywhere and nowhere, casting shadows that move independently of their sources. I can see my own shadow stretching across the breathing floor, but it's doing things I'm not doing, reaching for things I can't see. When I try to look directly at what it's reaching for, my vision blurs, tears streaming down my face without sadness. The coat stands up without a body to fill it. Time loops back on itself. I'm standing in the doorway again, looking at the coat hanging from its hook, water dripping in that familiar rhythm. But now I can see the water isn't clear. It's thick, viscous, carrying traces of light within it like liquid stars. Each drop that hits the floor spreads outward in perfect circles, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. The stairs creak with my weight, though I haven't moved. The sound echoes up and down, multiplying until it becomes a symphony of footsteps, all keeping perfect time. I can feel each step in my bones, vibrations that travel through the building's frame and into my skeleton, making my teeth ache. The buzzing returns, but now it has words hidden inside it, voices speaking in frequencies I can almost understand. They whisper about doors that should stay closed, about visitors who never leave, about rain that falls in rooms without ceilings. The words slip through my consciousness like water through a sieve, leaving only impressions behind. I mentioned I'd only stayed on the ground floor, but the mud on my shoes tells a different story. It's not mud at all, I realize now. It's something else entirely, something that clings and shifts and remembers where it's been. The stains form maps of places I've never been, paths through rooms that don't exist, leading to doors that open onto nothing. The hallway light flickers one last time, then goes out completely. In the darkness, I can hear the coat moving, fabric rustling against itself as it walks toward me on legs it doesn't have. The sound of its approach mixes with the dripping, the creaking, the buzzing, creating a symphony of wrongness that fills my head until I think it might split open. And then I'm back in the room with them, their pens scratching notes in rhythm with rain that might not be falling at all. They ask me again about what I saw, what I did, how long I stayed. I give them the same answers, the same careful lies, while the scent of old wood clings to my fingertips like a promise. The door upstairs is still half ajar. The coat still hangs beside it, dripping its liquid light onto floors that breathe. And sometimes, in the space between sleeping and waking, I can feel myself climbing those stairs again, reaching for that too-warm handle, stepping into rooms that exist only in the spaces between seconds. The mud is drying on my shoes, but it never quite disappears. Story 9. The notification light didn't blink. My fingers brushed the screen, seeking the familiar vibration, but it remained inert, unresponsive. The chair creaked under my weight without the usual reassuring groan, as though it too held its breath. The room drew in closer, the quiet pressing at the edges, and when I expected the distant hum of distant traffic, there was only a void. I focused on the wallpaper's pattern, each line and swirl pretending, as if any moment they might shift and betray their true design. The absence filled the space, tangible, as if daring me to acknowledge what had ceased to exist. I understand now what I've become. The silence isn't just around me, it lives inside me, replacing what used to be breath, heartbeat, the small electric hum of being alive. My reflection in the black screen shows someone who has crossed over, though I can't say into what. The crossing is complete. There's no returning from this threshold, no undoing what I chose to see through to its end. But memory works differently now. It moves backward like rewinding film, and I can trace each moment that led me here, each decision that narrowed my path until only one door remained open. The screen had been flickering just before it died completely. Not the usual malfunction, something more deliberate, rhythmic, like a pulse weakening. I remember sitting in the same chair, watching the display fade in and out, each cycle lasting a little longer in darkness. The room felt different then, still mine but somehow borrowed, as if I were a guest who had overstayed their welcome. The temperature had dropped by degrees I couldn't measure but could feel in my bones. My breath began to mist, though the thermostat hadn't changed. The walls seemed to absorb warmth rather than contain it, drawing heat from my skin whenever I came too close. I pulled my sweater tighter, but the cold was already inside, spreading outward from my chest like spilled water. I had been trying to call anyone, but the phone produced only that hollow tone that signals disconnection from the network. The landline was the same no-dial tone, just the sound of vast empty space, as if the wires led nowhere. Even the radio offered nothing but static that seemed to whisper just below the threshold of meaning. The power hadn't gone out exactly. The lights still worked when I flipped the switches, but they cast shadows that fell in the wrong directions, creating pockets of darkness where there should have been illumination. The refrigerator hummed, but when I opened it, the contents had begun to change in ways that defied explanation. Food I had bought that morning looked weeks old, while things I remembered throwing away sat fresh and untouched. Before that, I remember the neighbor's dog. It had been barking incessantly for hours, but not the usual territorial yapping. This was different, desperate, pleading, as if it were trying to warn everyone within earshot of something approaching. The sound cut through the walls and settled in my teeth, making them ache with each howl. I had gone to the window to look, pressing my face against the glass. The street appeared normal at first glance, but the longer I watched, the more I noticed the small wrongnesses. Cars parked in spaces where there had been none before. Street lamps that cast pools of light in slightly different positions. A mailbox that had definitely been blue yesterday, now standing red against the curb. The dog finally stopped barking, but not gradually. The sound simply ended mid-howl, as if someone had pressed a mute button on the world. The silence that followed felt heavy, expectant, like the pause between lightning and thunder. That's when I first noticed the wallpaper beginning to shift. Just at the periphery of my vision, the patterns seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that didn't match my own pulse. When I looked directly, everything appeared static, normal, but the moment I turned away, movement resumed in my peripheral awareness. I had touched the wall then, pressing my palm against the paper. It felt warm, almost feverish, and beneath the surface I could sense something moving, not insects or anything physical, but something like circulation, as if the walls had developed their own blood flow. The house had been making sounds throughout the afternoon, not settling noises I knew those intimately after living here so long. These were different, soft footsteps in rooms I wasn't occupying, the whisper of fabric brushing against door frames, the gentle click of latches engaging on doors I had left open. I remember checking each room systematically, looking for signs of intrusion. Everything appeared undisturbed, but the air in each space felt recently occupied, still warm with the presence of someone who had just stepped away. In the bathroom, the mirror held a faint fog, as if someone had breathed on it moments before my arrival. The basement door had been ajar, though I distinctly remembered closing it that morning. The darkness below seemed thicker than usual, more substantial, as if it had weight and texture. I could hear something down there, not quite movement, but a sense of shifting, like furniture being rearranged very slowly and carefully. I didn't go down to investigate. Some instinct warned me against it, the same primitive awareness that keeps animals from entering certain territories. Instead, I closed the door firmly and turned the lock, though I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was below was now aware of my presence above. The mail had arrived earlier, though I hadn't heard the usual approach of the truck or the clang of the mailbox lid. When I checked, there were letters addressed to me, but in handwriting I didn't recognize. The return addresses were from places that didn't exist on any map I could find, and the postmarks bore dates that made no sense, some from years in the past, others from dates that hadn't occurred yet. I had opened one of the letters with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in text that seemed to shift and rearrange itself as I read. The words formed sentences that felt familiar, as if I had written them myself, but I had no memory of composing such thoughts. The letter spoke of preparations, of readiness, of a threshold that was approaching and could not be avoided. The others remained unopened on the kitchen table, but I could feel them there, waiting, their contents pressing against the paper boundaries as if eager to be released into the world. Earlier that morning, I had woken to find my bedroom door open, though I always slept with it closed. The hallway beyond was darker than it should have been, filled with shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. I lay still, listening, and could hear what sounded like conversation coming from downstairs, multiple voices speaking in low, urgent tones. But when I crept to the top of the stairs to listen more carefully, the voices stopped immediately, as if they had been waiting for me to wake up, to begin paying attention. The silence that followed felt charged with anticipation, like a held breath. I had descended the stairs slowly, each step producing a creak that seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. The living room was empty, but the cushions on the couch bore the impressions of recent occupancy. The coffee table held 3 glasses, each containing what appeared to be water, though I had no memory of setting them out. One of the glasses was still cold to the touch, beaded with condensation, as if it had just been poured. Another was completely dry, as if it had been sitting there for hours. The third was somewhere between, and when I lifted it to examine it more closely, I could see my reflection multiplied and distorted in its surface, as if I were looking at myself through a funhouse mirror. The previous evening comes back to me now, swimming up through the layers of memory like something rising from deep water. I had been reading in my chair, this same chair, when the book began to change. Not the physical object, but the content. Words I had read hundreds of times before suddenly carried different meanings, told different stories, as if the text were adapting itself to some new purpose. I remember closing the book and setting it aside, but when I looked again moments later, it had fallen open to a page I had never seen before. The chapter heading was my name, and the text below described events from my own life with unsettling accuracy, including details I had never shared with anyone. The book continued to write itself as I watched, new words appearing on the page in real time, describing my growing unease, my decision to stop reading, even the act of setting the book aside. It was documenting everything I did, predicting my reactions with perfect precision, as if I were following a script I had never seen. That's when I first understood that I was no longer entirely in control of my own story. Something else was writing the narrative, and I had become both author and character, observer and observed, trapped in a loop of documentation that stretched backward and forward through time. But it started before even that, didn't it? The real beginning was smaller, more innocuous. I can see it now, crystal clear in my backward-flowing memory. I had been walking past the mirror in the hallway, just an ordinary moment on an ordinary day, when I caught sight of my reflection doing something I wasn't doing. It was subtle, just a slight delay, a fraction of a second where my reflection continued moving after I had stopped. I paused, studying my image, trying to reproduce the effect, but everything appeared normal. Just a trick of the light, I told myself, or fatigue playing games with my perception. But I had noticed, hadn't I, that tiny crack in the fabric of the everyday, that first indication that something fundamental had shifted. The reflection had been trying to show me something, to warn me of what was already beginning, what had perhaps already begun long before I became aware of it. And now, sitting here in this chair that no longer creaks, in this room where patterns pretend to be still, I understand that the mirror was the first to know. It had seen the change coming before I did, had tried in its limited way to prepare me for what I would become. The notification light will never blink again. The screen will never respond to my touch. But the story continues, written in reverse, each memory a step backward toward that first moment of recognition, that initial glimpse of what I was always meant to become. The silence is complete now, and I am part of it, woven into the absence like a thread in a tapestry that depicts nothing at all. Story 10. I'm trying to piece this together. The report sits in front of me, typed words on white paper, but the letters keep shifting when I blink. The initial assessment showed all windows latched securely. I remember reading that line over and over, my finger tracing each word like it might unlock something buried deep in my skull. But that's not how it started, is it? The humming, that's what I remember first, not the refrigerator humming they mentioned in the report, something else. Something that seemed to come from inside my teeth, vibrating through my jaw until my whole head felt like a tuning fork. I can still feel it sometimes when I'm trying to sleep, when I close my eyes and the darkness gets too thick. The plate on the countertop, clean, empty, but I remember standing there staring at it and my hands were shaking. Why were my hands shaking? The ceramic was white with a thin blue rim and I knew that plate. I had eaten from that plate, but the report said it was devoid of residue, like it had never been used at all. I remember the carpet, those uniform lines from the vacuum, but I also remember my bare feet on that carpet and it felt wrong, too clean, too perfect, like someone had erased every trace of life from those fibers. The air was cold, yes, but not just cold. It was empty, hollow, like the house was holding its breath. The ceiling fan blades turning slowly. No power, no wind, just turning. I keep coming back to the inventory records, what was supposed to be in that refrigerator. I can almost see myself opening that door, the light spilling out across the kitchen floor, but then the memory fractures. Splinters into 1,000 pieces that cut when I try to hold them. There was a sound from upstairs, footsteps maybe, or something dragging, but the report doesn't mention upstairs. Did I imagine that? The floorboards creaking in a rhythm that didn't match walking, too slow, too deliberate. My reflection in the refrigerator door, that's another piece that doesn't fit. I was wearing clothes I didn't recognize, a blue shirt that felt too tight around my neck. But when I look down at myself now, I'm wearing the same shirt I always wear. The memory tastes like copper pennies and static electricity. The calendar on the wall dates without markings, but I remember reaching for a pen, wanting to mark something, anything, to prove I was there. My hand wouldn't move, like the air had turned to amber and I was trapped inside it, watching myself from somewhere else entirely. The dining table, chairs aligned perfectly, but I can see crumbs on that table, scattered like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale, leading where? The chairs weren't empty either. Someone was sitting there. Someone was always sitting there, just at the edge of my vision. When I turned to look directly, nothing, but in my peripheral vision, a shape, a presence. The smell of metal, that's what I remember most clearly now. Not rust or iron, but something sharper. Something that made my sinuses burn and my eyes water. It clung to everything. The walls, the furniture, my skin. I kept washing my hands, but the smell wouldn't leave. The windows were latched, but I remember standing at one of them, pressing my face against the glass. The world outside looked wrong, too bright, too saturated, like someone had turned up the contrast until everything bled at the edges. I tried to open the latch, but my fingers wouldn't grip properly. They kept slipping, like the metal was coated in something slick. There was a door. This isn't in the report, but there was definitely a door. Maybe in the hallway, maybe somewhere else. It was slightly ajar and light leaked through the crack. Not electric light, something else. Something that pulsed with the same rhythm as the humming in my teeth. I wanted to open that door. I needed to open it. But every time I reached for the handle, I was somewhere else instead. The air getting thicker, that's real. I can still feel it sometimes, like breathing through wet cotton. Each breath was work. Each breath tasted of that metallic smell and something else. Something organic. Something that had been warm once but wasn't anymore. I keep checking my arms for marks, bruises, scratches, anything that might explain why I remember the sensation of being touched. Fingers on my wrist, pressure on my shoulder, but my skin is unmarked, clean, like that empty plate. The uniform lines in the carpet, I followed them once, walking heel to toe along each track the vacuum had made. They led me in circles, around the coffee table, past the sofa, back to where I started, but each circuit felt different. The furniture was the same, but the shadows had moved. The light was coming from somewhere else. Furniture placement appeared untouched, but I moved things. I know I moved things. The coffee table was 6 inches to the left. The lamp was unplugged. The books on the shelf were in the wrong order. Someone put everything back. Someone cleaned up after me while I was still there. The report doesn't mention the photographs, picture frames on the mantel, but when I looked at them, the faces were blurred. Not out of focus, but actually blurred, like someone had smeared them with their thumb while the ink was still wet. I knew those faces once. I'm sure I knew them. The temperature changed without warning. Cold air that seemed to come from inside the walls. I could see my breath sometimes, little puffs of vapor that hung in the air too long before dissipating. But the thermostat read normal. Everything read normal. I remember checking the locks on the windows over and over. They were secure, just like the report says. But secure from what? Something outside trying to get in, or something inside trying to get out. My hands kept returning to those latches, testing them, rattling them, like I was trapped or like I was trapping something else. The single plate, I keep coming back to that plate. It wasn't just clean, it was perfect, factory new. But I remember the weight of it in my hands. I remember setting it down on the countertop with a sound like breaking glass, even though it didn't break. The sound echoed longer than it should have, bounced off walls that seemed farther away than they looked. The blades of the ceiling fan turning without power, hypnotic. I watched them for hours maybe. Time moved differently in that space. Each rotation was slower than the last, but they never stopped, never wound down, just kept turning in the still air, casting shadows that wheeled across the walls like the hands of a broken clock. Something is stirring now. The memories are getting stronger, more insistent. They're pushing against the inside of my skull like something trying to hatch. The humming is back, that vibration in my teeth, and I can taste metal again. The report is incomplete. It has to be. There are rooms missing, moments missing, pieces of myself missing, but they're coming back now, slowly, reluctantly. I can hear the sailing fan starting to turn.